somebody who really is good at ramping up this kind of a session. So, long live Eels, long live Rick.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning, everybody. This is going to be a little bit of a different presentation because I feel like I'm masquerading. I'm actually not a fishery scientist first. I'm an environmental educator first. So I'm like a science teacher masquerading as a fisheries biologist today. But luckily, I've got a lot of help from the coolest animal in the world, the American eel. Hands up, just survey question. Who here has ever eaten an eel? That includes unagi, sushi. Look at that. So almost every hand in the room is up. And I'm going to argue that it's very hard to be more intimate with an animal than eating it. So right off the bat, we've all got an intimate relationship with eels, which is a fantastic thing to have. We're going to be talking about fish conservation through citizen science. I work for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, specifically the Hudson River Estuary Program, as well as the National Estuary and Research Reserve. We have a whole suite of programs where we try and get all of the people who live and work and visit the Hudson River watershed engaged with the river and engaged with its tributaries. And I did bring swag to the conference. So out front, if anybody wants to grab their very own Fishes of the Hudson River poster, there's a whole box of them. So please grab one. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. And by the way, I realize some of you are familiar with the Hudson River, but for many of you, this is your first time, either to the country or to this watershed. So welcome to the Hudson Valley. So glad you could be here. In the next 25 minutes, I'm going to talk about the who's, the what's, the where's, the why's of this citizen science project, the Eel Project in the Hudson River. I'm going to talk a little bit about our data discoveries, but most of our data discoveries I'm going to leave for Miss Sarah Mount, my colleague, who's going to be talking later in this conference. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about our people progress, but my other colleague, Aidan Mabey, has got a wonderful poster that goes a little bit deeper into that. So if you don't get enough from this presentation, there are plenty of opportunities for that to happen, which is terrific. Most people in this room are pretty familiar with eels, but if not, it's a catadromous species. They are not, I know I say born, that's because it comes up later, you'll see when. American eels are hatched in the Sargasso Sea. In salt water, they migrate to tributaries from northern South America all the way up to Greenland and maybe even Iceland. And when they get here, they are this particular form called the glass eel. They transform into elvers and then into yellow eels where they mature in salt or brackish or even fresh waters. And at the end of their lives, which can be pretty variable, they will make their way back to the Sargasso Sea to spawn. It's an amazing life story, and that alone is enough to be fascinating. I could drop the mic now, walk out, and be like, wow, this is a great presentation, Eels. But we're going to focus on, today, we're really going to focus on that interesting glass eel phase, that post-larval little eel that is making that transition from ocean to estuary to tributary. And it's an amazing animal. The Hudson River Eel Project is based on former studies. And I want to give a huge shout out to Carol Hoffman, who does great DEC work on Long Island, and she has been incredibly helpful in putting this program together. But I really want to put a special shout out, because I'm looking right at him, Dr. Bob Schmidt. Can we have a round of applause for Dr. Bob Schmidt, please? Who really pioneered the methods that we use. So every spring at 13 sites, we put in these cone-shaped fyke nets. And for about 8 weeks, they're staked right where a tributary meets the tidal Hudson River. So the tidal tributary mouths are where these are put in. Usually hard up adjacent to one of the shore banks. Every day, teams of volunteers go out and sample these nets. Those volunteers could be DEC staff, but they're more likely to be high school students, college interns, retirees, members of watershed groups, folks who just go out with their families, a whole panoply of volunteers who are trained to check these nets, remove the eels, count them, sort of signify if they're glass eels or the slightly older elvers, weigh a subset of them, and then very importantly, take those eels and transfer them upriver above the nearest barrier to migration. Could be a dam, could be a culvert, whatever. We don't want to catch them again, and we also want to help them on their journey where they're going. We do our best to follow ASMFC protocols, and we're always in touch with them and with Carol and others to make sure that our data is as strong as can be. If you're wondering where these are, we've got 13 sites planned for 2019. So yes, there may be an Eel Project site near you. Come on out and join us. Further south is at Richmond Creek in Staten Island. And we cover a whole estuary gradient from saltwater through the brackish waters of Rockland and Westchester County, on up all the way to the Post and Kill in Troy, very, very close to the federal dam at Troy. So we've got a great series of sites. We've been doing this since 2008 is when we started, so we're starting to get a good time series too at a lot of our sites. A lot of people have asked me, so how do you build one of these citizen science projects? What are the steps involved in this? It looks complicated, but the eel itself is such a magnetic animal, it really lends itself to this. There's that preseason part where the key here is to organize yourself with great partners. And there's a lot of our Eel Project partners in the room today. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm not naming everybody, but thank you very much for being partners. Recruiting volunteers, whether that be in a school, whether that be in a community center, whether that be via the web. And then organizing your volunteers, training your volunteers, and prepping your gear. As everybody here knows, you got to spend a lot of time sewing up nets. Many of you are probably like, oh yeah, Bowser, don't tell me about sewing up nets. Then there's the season itself, which usually runs for us in the Hudson River somewhere in early to mid-March through mid-May-ish. It's going to depend year to year. We spend a lot of time training our volunteers, and then boom, the season is up and running, and the key there is constant communication and constant checkups with your volunteers. Keep reinforcing that training, reinforcing that data collection, and making them feel valued. I have to say though, it really lends itself, because if you've never held a glass eel in your hand, it's pretty awesome. The first time you hold these squiggling little toothpick linguinis, a rainbow comes out with a unicorn sliding down it, music plays, you're like, oh my gosh, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and it feels really good. And then to see that reaction in people who aren't fishery scientists, who are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was going on. It's a really magical thing that fuels a program like this. It's very important, by the way, at the end of the season to get together and celebrate, or as we like to say, eelabrate. Do some eel valuations, okay? See how things went. And I have to tell you another thing here about a citizen science project. Yes, I realize on everybody's budget and expense list, waders and boats and nets are important. But do not underestimate the power of pizza and really great eel t-shirts. All right? Absolutely essential for keeping your volunteers happy and coming back year after year. We have a great retention rate, and Aiden's poster will go into that a little bit. By the time the season is over, remember, somewhere out at sea, the next cohort of glass eels are on their way. So the whole cycle starts up again, and we keep going. So if anybody is interested in getting a project like this started in your waterway, please, by all means, get in touch with me, because we're always looking for partners to expand and do this program. One of the questions we get most is your data valid? Is your data robust? And my answer is yeah, I think it is. Because here's why. First of all, the gear is very species specific. If you've ever opened up a glass eel fight net in the middle of March, there isn't much in there except eels. The way the gear works is very species specific. The protocols are very straightforward. We keep our data sheet straightforward. We are always doing ongoing trainings. The biggest skill is, can you count and can you withstand freezing cold water in March? Those are kind of the big skills there. And then we also provide lots of really good graphic guides. How do you weigh eels? How do you tell the difference between an elver and a glass eel? How do you tie the complex knots that Bowser insists you tie on the eel nets? Right? So we try to help out those volunteers as much as we can. Constant training, constant coaching. A few data stories. Again, Sarah Mount will go into this more. Here's just sort of our basic graph. Since we started in 2008, we've caught, counted, and released about 690,000 glass eels. Now, those numbers obviously have gone up over time because we've added sites. So if we do a little bit of normalization by basically saying, all right, what is the average eels caught per day of sampling in a year, averaged across all sites, we still see a similar trend where in the first few years, we were catching a lot fewer eels, and then as time goes on, it's erratic, but we are seeing more glass eels come in. Again, there is going to be some variability in there. One thing that might be more useful is to look at a time series of site by site. So, for example, here's an interesting graph right here. These are the average eels caught per day per year. The axes are kind of switched here. And averaged across 5 years. From our southern sites, Richmond Creek is in Staten Island, saltwater. And to the north, Hanacroy Creek is just south of Albany. Tidewater, but fresh. And what we've noticed year after year is the more southern sites seem to have lower eel recruitment. And we don't know what that is. It could have something to do with the salt front. It could have something to do with the effect of the Hudson River Highlands, which are a bit of an hourglass pinch point on the Hudson. It could have something to do with salinity. But it is interesting. Also interesting that this graph doesn't show is, yes, the northern sites show a lot of eels, but there's a huge amount of variability. Almost every year there seems to be 1 or 2 sites that are the high flyers for that year. Like there'll be one year where Passaic eels are huge. The next year it'll be Hanacroy Creek. The next year it'll be Fallkill. We don't know what the rhyme or reason, if any, there is for that. But there seems to be almost this shift of somewhere in the in the upper tidal Hudson, you're going to have some huge gains, some real strong eel migrations for that year, and you may not see that following year. One of the other things that's been really useful for us is it's very challenging to know when to start the project. It's very challenging to have volunteers in the water for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, not catching anything in the coldest part of the year, but we do want to get our nets out early so that we can get the early part of that migration. Our awesome colleague Grace Ballou came up with a really strong correlation between January and February water temperatures and the date of first glass eel arrival. She got this data, by the way, if you're not familiar with this, a phenomenal tool for anybody working on the Hudson River is the Hudson River Environmental Conditions Observing System, or HRECOS, that's memorable. You should absolutely check out that website. Phenomenal river and meteorological data on there. She correlated a pretty strong link between January, February river temperatures. She estimated last year that the eels would arrive on March 25th. We put the net in, geez, almost a week and a half, 2 weeks earlier anyway, and lo and behold, on March 20th, we saw our first eels. So we're really hoping that this kind of becomes a model that allows us to A, get the early part of the migration, and B, not torture our volunteers with cold, empty nets for too long. So, a few data stories there. There's also the people end of this. And one of the questions I get a lot is, why eels? Why eels in citizen science? What an odd, weird little creature. Well, there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, say what you will, they are oddly charismatic. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like weird, you know, charismatic. Like Steve Buscemi charismatic. You know, like why do I like Steve Buscemi? But I do. Eels have that same weird thing. There is also a very real conservation need. ASMFC has labeled them as a depleted stock. There is a real dearth of information on eels across their whole life cycle. So any information that we can get is new, valid, interesting, needed information. The migration season is relatively short and relatively discreet. I could pretty much tell a volunteer, we need your help for 2 months. It's not, I need your help for an indefinite amount of time and watch people attrition over time. No, we've got really strong signatures. You're very likely to see an eel. It's not like, oh, I'll do a citizen science program on mountain lions and never see a mountain lion for years. And then, probably most importantly in some ways, is the diversity of habitats of eels equals a diversity of people who can get involved. This is very much an equal opportunity diagamous species. There are eels in city creeks. We are less than half a mile from the Fallkill Creek, and it is one of our most popular eel sites right here in the city of Poughkeepsie. Suburban sites, rural sites, you're going to have eels. So that diversity of habitats means a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different abilities can be a part of that. Very, very key for the estuary program and the work that we do. Okay. How do we get volunteers? One of the things we do is we're doing constant reach out into the classroom. That includes not just high schools, but colleges, adult groups as well. We are always trying to spread the word of eels, get people mapping eels, get people interested in eels. They travel pretty well, as a matter of fact, and we've got a couple at Norrie Point, about 9 miles north of here. If you need to see an eel today, we can actually make that happen. I should have brought one. By the way, every slideshow has to have the obligatory slide with way too many words that you can't read. This is mine. Right? And what this is we did a study with the Carey Institute of why students wanted to do the Eel Project. What was their motivation for doing it, for coming back? And all of this boils down to one thing. And the one thing is internal motivators matter more than external ones. And that's a really important thing for our group to remember. In the case of our students, we thought that we could recruit students by saying, hey, it'll look good on a resume. Hey, you're going to help the environment. Hey, you can do this for extra credit. That was nice. But what students really liked was, hey, I can go out with my friends. Hey, this is fun. Hey, I like to be outside. What do you know? And so now that is how we target our recruitment, is to get a personal relationship between students, their friends, and the river. Then we can get into the conservation and the resumes and the eel science stuff. So that's been a really, really important thing for us. But what I'll do for a second is just pause for one moment and let the students talk for themselves if this works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So hold on a second here. Oh. Let's see if this works. Oh, I bet it will.
I began coming here in my 3rd year of teaching. It's my 10th year of teaching, and it's the most exciting thing that I do that's real, that the kids love. Let the kids really be scientists and not just students. It gives them a sense of reality.
I've learned that the Fallkill Creek is a lot bigger than I thought. It's got more than just eels. It's got herring, it's got catfish, it's got scuds.